I'm going to demonstrate two different ways of getting snow to look like it's on trees. I've poured out a little bit of masking fluid here, and on dry paper, of course. I just wet the brush in plain water first. It's not going to be in this stuff long enough to worry about it drying in the brush. So if I can just get it on here quickly, I can rinse the brush out. Then of course I'm going to let this dry completely, and I'm not going to put a hair blower on it because that'll just melt it, almost weld it into the paper. So I want it to just dry normally. I'll go on with something else while that's happening. So now it's dry, and that's what it looks like when it's dry. So I can paint, I can put my water right over top and paint right over top of it. I'm just using this hard edge to split between the background and the foreground, so I can paint half the picture at one shot on wet paper. Then I'll break the other parts into little segments. But I'll get most of this done in one big swoop here. Shadow color of the snow goes over everything. Ultramarine blue with a little bit of burnt sienna just to gray it down so that it isn't that harsh ultramarine. Use a 1-inch flat brush, and you can see the mix I'm putting down is fairly dry. It's not really flooding onto the paper. And you're still seeing a brush stroke in it, which is what I want because I want to get some shadow effects going on the surface of the snow. I don't want the wash to just run flat over everything. So the key is on the palette, squeeze the brush out so it doesn't have too much water in it. Makes a good combination of your two pigments, but without a lot of water. And that sweeping motion helps to keep your brush strokes visible. I'm going to put some of these trees in now, but I think I'm going to switch to the round brush. It should be a little easier to manage. I want to get soft edges on them, but I don't want them to flood either. So this is a pretty good dry mixture. And it's just that it'll make these trees look like they're more in the distance. There'll be more depth back there. If they're not all hard edges, I can always draw hard edge shapes on top later when the paper's dry, but now's a good chance to get some of the suggestion of a forest. And I'm going to use an oil painting brush, just kind of a cheap bristle. I've switched to raw sienna with a bit of ultramarine so that I get a bit of a greenish look to these evergreens. Here again, just keeping a kind of a soft flare to them. I'm going to lift the snow off these later. Now that is all dry, and I'm going to do these foreground mounds of snow in segments, like one little area at a time. Easier to control them this way. Same routine, just wet the paper. I like putting a lot of water on it so you can just let it soak in a little bit. Mix up the same thing, ultramarine with burnt sienna. get that soft edge. And just draw shadow shapes where you think you might want them. Don't want to overdo it, but I like to soften that little sharp corner there. Just clean the brush out and lift it. I'll do the same thing with this. Couple of stones underneath there. Snow's piled up on them. I'll do them both at the same time. I think this, I won't have to do every one in the video, but you got the idea. I want to make sure that it, as it turns out of the light, I get that edge fairly soft. Looks a bit sharp there, but clean brush will soften it a bit more. It looks like it turns nicer, smoother shape. There's the odd sharp corner in snow, but trick is to get the roundness to it, make it look convincing. So you have to think of where the light and darks meet. You always want kind of a dark edge against a light edge. In this case, the stone behind, it's got light on the top, and the dark shadow side contrasts to get separation. Good to practice getting these dry mixtures. And that area is wet as well, so this goes on soft. Now everything is totally dry. It's about halfway through here, figure. And there's always going to be a few places where you think, oh, I didn't really get enough detail in some of the shadows. So can I go back in and try and dress it up a bit? And the trick is to blend it, because you don't really want a shadow overlap. You want it to just run into the other shadow. So you've got to use a fairly light dry brush just to sneak it in there without anybody knowing that it was done separately. It's a good thing to practice as well, because this happens a lot. Now, piece of masking tape, totally dry paper, because it will tear if it's not dry. And it just pulls that masking fluid off. Yes, you can feel if there's any little crumbs left. And we're back to this wash where we get a hard edge on one side and a soft edge on another. Great little exercise to practice, because here again I want to be able to isolate this mid-ground, say, bank of snow. I have an edge on the bottom part, and it's blended off into the distance. Just gives me another layer back in there among the trees. It'll read as there's a lot more depth in the final product. And paper being dry, I can start to scrub it out. This is a cut off little oil painting brush. Cut it off because it makes it so much more stiff. And I wet it, and that just moves a bit of the paint, and mop that up quickly while it's still damp. And you can shape your patches of snow on the branches. Once you get a bit of practice with that, it works quite nicely. Now I'll draw in, I'm using a liner brush just to add a few little, just dress it up a little bit. You can refine the patches of snow by showing some evergreens coming out from underneath the snow. Now we'll just using the same ultramarine and burnt sienna, being careful though to get contrast. If the background is a little dark, then I'm going to keep my shadow side of the snow even lighter. If the background is light like here, I'm going to have to go in with a little more dark shadow just to separate it. Otherwise it'll just all blend together. So the light's coming from the top left, so all my shadows are going to be coming down towards the bottom right. Now I'm wetting that because this little area will be easier to get a soft edge paper stamp. And once your snow is shaped, then you can go in and draw the dark branches. Back to using a bit of raw sienna with Winsor blue or phthalo blue or burnt sienna. Works with that as well. Just handy for making a quick dark. Doesn't even read as green, but you know it's green. And very dark reflections here. The water is quite shallow and very still, so it's absorbing a lot of the light, so the reflections of my snowbanks are going to be quite dark. And flat brush is very good for filling these areas in, because I can get a nice skinny line by going horizontally, or I can fill the large areas in quickly and keep that wash alive, so I'm not getting too many overlaps. It's dry edges and then going back, trying to get back fast enough. I like it if it's sort of continual with a nice blend. It's not a big deal if you get overlaps in the water. You can use them as ripples. That's the finished sketch.